Hello, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our weekly Zeise's Right chat on a live episode. We are doing things live today by Paul Zeise, Post-Gazette sports columnist. We're going to be talking about the Steelers wide receiver situation with the Davante Adams rumors now swirling. We're going to talk a little bit about the quarterback situation with Justin Fields, Russell Wilson, how polarized it's become. Then maybe we talk a little Najee Harris, Patrick Queen, Joey Porter Jr. So lots of Steelers talk coming your way. We're also going to talk about the Pirates and what they have done in terms of Bob Nutting holding on to Ben Cherington as general manager, Derek Shelton as manager. We're going to get Paul's thoughts on that. Maybe a little college football talk at the end. Before we do, just want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast, Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give us a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Okay, Paul, let's get into this wide receiver conversation. It feels very much like it did all summer right now with Davante Adams and, us getting told, the Steelers are interested. Oh, they're not interested. Oh, these other teams are more interested. It's going to be a lot of rumors, reporting, all that kind of stuff flying, just like it was for Brandon Aiyuk. I don't want to so much talk about that, more so, just the Steelers situation. And my question for you is Paul, why is it that we only hear about them being interested in these guys at the absolute top of the market? Are they betting that eventually, if they just focus on these top shelf wide receivers, that eventually one of them is going to end up with them, and that there's enough, at least theoretically in play for trades that, some of these guys are going to get traded here, and that's just the way it's going to be. Because I keep wondering, do you really need these guys to make the wide receiving room better? Can't you go, find someone who's not making $30 million to improve this wide receiving room when your number 2 and 3 options are Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin III?
Well, I mean, part of it is, I think anytime a receiver theoretically or really, realistically or whatever comes on the market, aren't the Steelers naturally going to be one of the teams that's interested? I think that's part of it. I mean, if a guy like, what was the guy that we talked about from the Broncos? Cortland Sutton. If he sort of comes on the market, I mean, I guess there would be a little bit of a buzz, but it wouldn't be the kind of buzz that there is with one of these top name or big name guys. And the bottom line is the Steelers, for whatever, however you want to say, I've heard all kinds of theories as to how they don't need a second receiver. Well, they do. And I think everybody knows that they do. And I think everybody sees that they do. And I think they've also made it very clear that they are in a place right now where they need a receiver, and they know it, and they're interested in going out and getting one. So anytime one of these guys, Adam, comes on the market, until they actually get one, I would assume the Steelers are going to be linked to them, whether it's real or not. I mean, what was it? Yeah, I think it was yesterday. I was reading that, the Steelers are really into it, and, they are one of the teams that are being considered. And then this morning, I think I read it's down to like the Jets and one other, I forget who the other team is, and it's not the Steelers. So I think that when it comes to these rumors, some of it is a product of the fact that we have 24/7 access to, media in so many different, forms. I mean, there's how many Steelers podcasts out there? There's how many NFL podcasts out there? There's how many, and you've got the local talk shows, and you've got the national talk shows, and you've got the hot take shows on ESPN. I mean, you've got a million different outlets that are constantly looking for new material. And so that's why every one of these stories becomes a bigger story probably than it really is. I mean, I'll say the same thing I said when it came to Brandon Aiyuk. I'm sure the Steelers have kicked the tires, but how interested they are, I'm just not really all that sure. And I think that's the big thing to me is they are probably in so many ways just kind of taking a look at it and doing their due diligence. But I would expect that, when push comes to shove and we get to a point in the season where now some of these teams are going to look to like trade maybe a couple of guys here and there, the Steelers will be in on somebody who's lesser. Maybe a guy like Cortland Sutton or, one of these lesser receivers. I mean, I expect them to go out and sign somebody or trade for somebody or whatever. I just will be shocked if it's somebody like, Davante Adams or, before when we were talking about Brandon Aiyuk. I mean, it became clear to me if it was going to be Brandon Aiyuk, it was probably going to happen. Once it became like, okay, now we're into week 3. Now we're into week 4. The longer it went, the less likely. So to me, this whole thing, I think it's fun to talk about, and it gives some good content for guys like you and I, and guys that do content-based shows. But at the end of the day, I'd be shocked if really anything happens.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the fit because I think this situation is markedly different than Brandon Aiyuk because he's not the same player. He's not the same age. I think when you were talking about bringing in Brandon Aiyuk, you were thinking, hey, he's younger. You're going to get him for a good chunk of his prime on a second contract. You got a guy that's on the way up rather than in Davante Adams' case. I think the only direction you can go is down from here. There's, I think, a lot more money on the table as well. I mean, what do you think of the fit of this guy, in particular being the one that they would be theoretically chasing when they seem so interested in someone who is very much not that in Brandon Aiyuk?
Yeah, I mean, I think sorry about that. The one thing I don't quite know is what his contract status is beyond this year. Do you know what his contract status is beyond this year?
I believe Ray said that there's cap hits of like 30 million plus the next couple of years for him. And then this year they would be paying the prorated portion and they'd be paying the base salary. I think those numbers next year include the bonus. They would not have to pay the bonus this year. I think he said something around like $1 million a game prorated during the rest of the season is what they would be paying him. But then next year things jump up, and Ray's suggestion on our video yesterday on the YouTube channel was they'd probably have to rework the deal for it to work for the Steelers moving forward.
Yeah, then I would say this. I would say basically I'm less inclined to believe it's going to happen. If he was a straight rental guy, Adam, I think I would be more inclined to believe it was going to happen. But given, where he's at in his career and everything else, I can't imagine they're going to sign up for 2 or 3 years of whatever, the premium they're going to have to pay to keep him. I just can't. I think that if he was a guy that this is it, he's a free agent at the end of the year, and Seahawks were just trying to get there. Raiders were trying to just get something from him, whatever they could get and not lose him for nothing. I would be more inclined to believe that the Steelers would say, okay, we'll take a flyer on this guy. If it doesn't work out, I mean, what's it going to really be? 12 weeks, 13 weeks, and then, we're out of the contract, and it's, no harm, no foul. So that leads me to believe that this is probably not going to happen with the Steelers.
Well, I wanted to ask this too, Paul. I mean, does he even really fit in this offense? I mean, he's known pretty well as a volume guy, a guy who needs to get the ball a lot to get in a rhythm. We're talking like 10, 12 targets a game. Do you see 10 to 12 targets a game for him in this offense when A, they don't seem predisposed to throw the ball, especially to receivers very much, and B, when you already have George Pickens across the field?
Well, that's the other part of it. I mean, I don't think he's the kind of receiver that fits what they're looking for, what they need in that second receiver. And so, I think if you look at his contract, you look at his skill set, you look at his age, you look at everything and put it all together, it feels like it's what's that saying? Something like a square peg in a round hole, or some, round peg in a square hole, or whatever the hell it is. I mean, that's what it feels like to me. It feels that way. And I think that's the key to me is like you just have to, look at it that way and be kind of like sort of I don't know, critical thinker about it and say, does this really fit? And I just don't think it does.
Another thing that I wanted to bring up, because I don't know if you watched the receiver show on Netflix that featured Davante Adams, with the Raiders last season, but it was something I watched the whole thing and got to see a lot of him up close from last season and kind of the way he handled the Raiders not being very good, and just kind of the way he handled himself. And he very much seems to have like a similar team dad vibe to him that like Aaron Rodgers walks around with, or I think about Ben Roethlisberger late in his career when he'd send out texts and expect his like teammates to just be sitting there waiting for Ben to text them, and they'd get all excited. That's what like his conception was. And I think the Steelers have a guy somewhat like that in Russell Wilson already in the locker room. I mean, just in a personality situation, can you have two of those guys who think they're the team dad walking around the locker room?
No. And again, I think, as part of that, I think the Steelers have made it clear that George Pickens is their guy. So, you add that to the fact that he would come here and, like you said, might not get a lot of passes thrown his way. I mean, is he somebody you want to bring into your locker room? And it doesn't mean he's a bad guy, but he could be a really bad fit. And I think one of the things that seems pretty clear about this Steelers team is they seem to be in a place where they're all on the same page and the chemistry is pretty good. I just don't know if you want to disrupt that. I just don't know if you really want to disrupt that. I don't know if you want to bring him into your receiver room. I don't know if you want a guy that it's entirely possible, Adam, he goes through a game and gets 2 targets. And say he gets 2 targets and they lose. Do you want, potential loose cannon or somebody that's going to, make it very clear he's not happy? With the Aiyuk thing, there was a fit. I felt like he was exactly the kind of receiver they needed to be their second guy. I felt like his age and whatnot, that he was in, the prime of his career, and that the Steelers would get 3 or 4 really good years out of him. And everything else, I thought he fit. Every time I've heard of, this guy's name come up, I've never, ever once said to myself, well, that would be a really good fit, because I just don't think it would be. I think it really, if you look at it that way, I think it would be a bad fit. And I don't think you want to bring somebody like that into your locker room to sort of upset the apple cart, so to speak.
Yeah, I think he would have been a great fit with Ben Roethlisberger 10 years ago. I mean, in kind of the Antonio Brown role, does he fit in what they're trying to do now, though? I don't necessarily see that. And like I just echo, like I'm not saying that Davante Adams is a bad guy by any means. I'm just saying he seems to like want to be the guy on the team. And I'm not just talking about that in the sense of a normal wide receiver wanting to be the guy, in the passing game. I think he wants to be, the center of the team, the leader of the team, kind of in the way, quarterbacks traditionally are, because that is, I think, something he probably learned from Aaron Rodgers and has taken to Vegas. And he's just frustrated with the way, the things are being run around him there and wants to go to a different place. But I don't think that place really at the end of the day is Pittsburgh. Paul, let's get to a few other topics here. Let's get into the QB talk. I think I asked you this a few weeks ago, but his only sharpened it. I thought it might not go that way during the season. I thought once people got to see Justin Fields, it would become a little less polarizing because you'd have some tape in front of you. I think the opposite has happened. When I read the comments on our Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel, I feel like I'm like seeing people from two different universes, where either Justin Fields is, the cornerstone of the franchise and they got to get him a deal tomorrow, or Justin Fields is a disaster at quarterback and holding the Steelers back in innumerable ways. What are people watching? How can you watch this team and come to such polarized conclusions about this guy? I mean, I think he's done pretty well personally. Would you like to see more from him? Absolutely. So I can understand fans who want to see that. But how can you come to the conclusion that either he is, a savior of the franchise, or that he's cooked after these 4 games? I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, what would get really interesting, Adam, is what happens if the Steelers lose on Monday night and Justin Fields is just kind of average, because it feels like Russell Wilson is getting closer to the point where he's actually going to be healthy enough to actually be in the competition. Is that the way we want to say it? It feels like, there's been no pressure on Justin Fields to this point, simply because, it's either him or it doesn't happen. So now if Russell Wilson gets back into it and he's healthy next week, you're coming off 2 losses in a row. If Justin Fields is somewhat mediocre, then I think it becomes at least a discussion as to what, maybe it's time. But as of right now, I've seen nothing from Justin Fields that makes me say, boy, they need Russell Wilson to be the starter. Nothing. They've been very conservative with him, and I'll tell you this, I even think the other day, what we saw was if they fall behind, he does have the ability to bring them back. Now, obviously they didn't get all the way over the top, but that has as much to do with the defense as anything to do with the offense. And so I just feel like that's the biggest thing to me is, you sort of built a little bit of an identity with Justin Fields. Your offense seems to like, his teammates seem to like playing with him and for him. I'll be honest with you, I would not go the other direction and say, hey, if Russell Wilson's healthy, let's put him back in. Not because I think he's cooked, not because I don't think he can get it done, not for any other reason other than I think Justin Fields actually has proven that he's capable of doing the job. And so let's see how far it goes with him.
Yeah, I mean that's what the analytics say, is that he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. Does that mean he's going to stay there for a full season? He still has to prove. He still has a lot to prove, but he can't prove it if he's riding the bench behind a guy who is at the end of his career. And like you said, that they have not begun team building around. And I think I said this on one of our Steelers live streams, Paul, is that Mike Tomlin loves to talk about team building, right? And that this is not a finished product, and you're working toward the team you're going to be in December when the games really start to matter. And to me, it just feels like you're going to be starting over if you go to Russell Wilson right now for reasons that kind of would pass my understanding. Now, if Justin Fields struggles and for a couple of games, you say, hey, let's see what Russ has in him. I certainly can see that, but at this stage, it does feel like you're messing with the cohesion that you've been building and that you say is so important to you. I wanted to ask this about Russ as well. Do you think some people, in terms of why this is such a polarized conversation, just need to see Russell Wilson on the field for the Steelers and see what he's got in a couple of games, the same way they've seen it with Justin Fields, and then maybe that will help people make up their minds about how to move forward? Because I think there's a chunk of people who have Russell Wilson in his prime, in their brains as an expectation of what, he could bring if he's healthy compared to Justin Fields. And, do you think people just need to see that he's not that player anymore, even if he can still get it done, but that he's not, arguably one of the 2-3 best quarterbacks in the league?
Yeah, I think there are some people that still sort of romanticize about what Russell Wilson was going to bring to the Steelers offense. Absolutely. I think there are some that want to see him and want to see because they've convinced themselves that the passing game is going to go through the roof if he gets in there, and he's a much better passer and all that other good stuff. I don't need to see it, just from the standpoint of I think what the Steelers have done with Justin Fields has been good. So to me, ride the momentum as long as you can ride the momentum, and if it comes down to it, you got to bring Russell Wilson in and he's got to play. Then we'll see what he has, and then we can make judgments, I guess, about it. But there are some people who, it's clear to me, they sort of have romanticized how good Russell Wilson is, or, at this stage in his career, even though we really haven't seen him this year at all. And really the last 2 years in Denver, I don't know that we got to see fully anything close to what we saw when he was in his prime in Seattle. But there are people when they signed him who really believed, okay, we're going to get borderline Hall of Fame Russell Wilson. I just don't know if that guy exists anymore. And I tell you, a big part of it, Adam, is simple. It's that I just don't know how much he really wants to play football. Like, I think he wants to play, but I don't know if he loves it anymore. It's hard. It's hard for me to make a case that he's super motivated to come back. I mean, he's already got a Super Bowl ring, so his legacy is intact. He's got $40 million coming to him from the Broncos no matter what happens this year. He's got a wife that's worth, X amount of dollars, and he's got all kinds of outside interests. I mean, how much really is he in love with the idea of going out there and getting hit and everything else that happens when you play football every day? I have a hard time believing that.
And how much interest does he have in spending the next 2 to 3 years of his career in Pittsburgh? I mean, Let's just be honest. I don't know that this is it is a destination if you want to win and all that, but I don't know if it's a destination in the sense of, like you said, all of the things he has going on. But I don't know. You could probably make the same case about Seattle and Denver, and he played his whole career in those two cities. So, that is kind of what it is. Let's move on a little bit. I wanted to ask you about something I asked Chris about on the live stream on Sunday after the game. Chris Carter, he was in for you while you were on vacation, and I watched the way Najee Harris played on Sunday against the Colts, and I think he had 9 yards on his first 10 carries of the game, and I said that's not good enough. And Chris was concerned with the blocking and said the offensive line wasn't very good, and he was probably entirely right in terms of this is a young offensive line that is not where it needs to be. But I don't look at that as an excuse for Najee Harris at this stage of his career. I look at it and say he's got to do more to make up for those shortcomings as a guy in his 4th season playing for a contract. You got to find some holes. I'm not asking you to go off for 100 yards, but I'm asking you to do more than average less than a yard per carry, well into the second half.
Najee Harris is probably the most complicated player we've had in a long, long time. And I'll tell you why. Because I think everybody wants him to be something he's not. And there are a number of people who just can't let go of the idea that he's not this super ultra weapon that they thought they were getting when they got him out of Alabama. I think he is what he is, Adam. I do. I think he's a serviceable, reasonably decent running back who, at times can make some yardage out of nothing, but for the most part is a guy who is never going to be that super stud kind of player he was in Alabama. He's not Derrick Henry. He's not one of these guys that is going to, he's not Saquon Barkley. He's, for lack of a better term, a very replaceable, serviceable running back. And so my expectations for him have been very similar for the last year and a half. For the second half of last year and so far this year, I just think that there's too much volume of work that we've been able to watch. It's not like he's only played 5 games or 8. I mean, we've seen him now play a lot of games behind a lot of different offensive lines against a lot of different defenses. And you know what we get for the most part? A guy who probably is going to average 60 to 65 yards per game. That's what he does. That's fine. And probably 3.5 yards a carry. That's fine. But when you're trying to be the power running team that wants to base your offense on being able to run people over and all the other stuff and being able to run and dictate it when you do, I don't think it's good enough to warrant another contract for him. And I don't think it's good enough really to realistically believe that when these other 2 guys are healthy, I mean, it's pretty bad when the running game seemed to be better when Jaylen Warren or Cordarrelle Patterson are in the game than with Najee Harris. When you consider both of those guys, one's supposed to be a kick returner, the other guy they got, as an undrafted free agent. It's why, and it sounds like I'm trying to be disrespectful. I'm really not. I'm just being honest. It's why I say Najee Harris is the ultimate sort of serviceable, okay, acceptable running back that's also very replaceable.
Yeah. And I think, it's not even my frustration that he's not a superstar, that this is not a Derrick Henry in Tennessee situation. I don't know that I ever cultivated that expectation in my mind. And I know there are probably a lot of other fans who didn't. I think it's more a matter of, can you make someone miss? When you're getting contacted in the backfield, you get 10 carries, and there's guys in the backfield. Can you make them miss once or twice? Because that's what short circuits drives, Paul, is you give a guy 10 carries, he averages less than a yard. I mean, if you have 10 of those plays in a game, that's, in modern offensive football, that's kind of a death knell. And you look at how they played on Sunday. They did a lot of good things, but that was not one of them. And you brought up the Cordero Patterson thing. Behind the same offensive line, against the same opponents, he's running like a gazelle back there. He's like 9 feet tall, he looks like sometimes, and just darting through and running with power that I think we've talked about with Jaylen Warren in the past, but he also looked shot out of a cannon, and we haven't necessarily seen that Naji Harris at different points. So I guess I want to ask this question less so in terms of the long-term future, and more in terms of what's the upside for him in this offense if this is what we've gotten from him through 4 weeks?
He'll be a guy that'll go off for 120 or 130 yards in a game or two. And when he does that, everyone will say, all of his apologists and all the Steeler apologists will tell us, you see what he can be? But for the most part, he'll be a guy that gets you 50 to 60 yards. That's what he's going to do. I think we have, again, way too much of a volume of work to, continue to put our head in the sand and say that this is going to happen for him at some point. He's going to turn into something that he really hasn't been. It's just the way it is. And I think, hindsight being 2020, would they rather have James Conner? Probably. They probably would have rather kept James Conner and not have to use a first-round pick on Najee Harris. But James Conner was hurt all the time, and, they felt like he was replaceable. But in some ways, he's been better than Najee Harris, in his time in Arizona than Najee Harris has been here. And Arizona is terrible, and they're usually playing from behind, which would mean they're throwing it more than they're passing it, or throwing it more than they're running it.
Paul, one more question on the Steelers before we move to Pirates and some college football. What's your level of concern about Patrick Queen and Joey Porter Jr.? The metrics for both of them are pretty horrific. They have both had rough games against the Colts. Joey Porter dropping or misplaying is probably the better way to say it. 2 balls that probably should have been intercepted. Patrick Queen has been missing tackles and getting cooked in coverage. And it manifested in this game in ways that they seemed to get away with through the first 3 games. Are you worried about those 2 guys at all yet?
I'm more worried about Queen, because I think one of the things about him that he was brought here to the inside linebackers it's been a problem in coverage with them. And I think what the Colts did was basically really exploit the inside linebackers. And, part of that is I think that the Colts, I don't know if he's a good head coach, but I think their head coach is a really creative offensive mind. I'm not going to say he's a guru or a genius or whatever, but I think he's pretty creative, and I think he's pretty good at watching film and attacking. And I think that's one of the things they did in the first half. They really exploited the Steelers' inside linebackers and were able to, get some chunk plays and do some things. I don't know if that's going to get better. I think Joey Porter had an off day, but I think he's a good player. And I think at that position, you're under such a spotlight, you're under such a microscope, and there's so many plays that are coming right at you. And if you don't make a play, it's a big play for the other team. If you're I don't know, and even if you're an inside linebacker or you're a down lineman and you don't make a play, it can still be a situation where, someone else makes a play and, maybe you give up a yard or 2, but it's not a big play. If Joey Porter doesn't make a play, it's a big play every time because of who he's covering. So my thing with him is I don't worry so much about him because you're going to have games like that. Unless you're Darrelle Revis, you're going to have some games. And he's still young. He's still learning. I think one of the things that they're probably trying to get him to do is change his technique so he doesn't get those holding and, grabbing interference penalties, and maybe there's a little transition going on. Queen, though, to me, I hate to say it like this, but I'm not sure they've gotten their bang for the buck from him in any game. Forget about this game, in any game. And that's concerning. And so to me, I separate them both. I think the one is worse than the other.
Yeah, and I do our PFF grades post every week, and Queen has not graded well, but lots of middle linebackers don't. I think that whatever formula they're using at PFF kind of prejudices against the middle linebackers and makes it difficult for them to put up consistently solid grades. That being said, there's a problem not just with the grades. It's the missed tackles. It's the it's the missed tackles. It's getting cooked in coverage where he's being targeted and things of that nature. Paul, we lost your video. We just got your audio at the moment.
Hang on. I don't know what's going on. What do you think is going on?
Oh, there you are. There he is. He's back.
There's a button. There's a button that apparently got hit somehow. I don't know.
Well, we're back, and I think there's other metrics other than the Pro Football Focus grade post that he's not doing well in, I think is my point.
I think the missed tackles will come, but boy, I would like to tell you his coverage, that is concerning because that's been a problem for the Steelers linebackers forever.
Yeah, and like Peyton Wilson is grading well, and Landon Roberts is grading well. So it's when you're comparing those guys side by side, it's not just whatever PFF's evaluation method is. He's just not as good as the guys next to him at the moment. So certainly a storyline to keep in mind. All right, we're going to get into some of the red meat now with the Pirates. There's a lot going on. Derek Shelton, Ben Cherington coming back. I think Paul and I are both fired up to talk about that. So hopefully you'll stick around for some Pirates talk here on the live first Paul Zeise live show that we're trying out. Before we get to that, I just wanted to thank another sponsor. It's Goldberg, Persky, and White. If you are diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky, and White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. Okay, Paul. Here's my question about the Ben Cherington and Derek Shelton coming back, because a lot of people seem flummoxed with how it could possibly happen. Who are the people advocating for this? Who are the people who are okay with this? Because I think, generally fans and media are on the same page right now. Sometimes I think the Pirates beat specifically likes to talk fans into like realism and kind of make them think more practically about things. But I'm not seeing a whole lot of that right now. I'm seeing a lot of reporters saying, how can you justify this? And I'm seeing a lot of fans say that. Are the people saying those things, though, Paul, the people that the Pirates listen to? Because my theory is that there is a season ticket holder base that is content with whatever they, are being spoon-fed by management that does not have that kind of raising hell attitude that you see with the Penguins when they're chanting "Fire Hextall," or that you see with the Steelers when they were chanting "Fire Canada" last year. There does not seem to be, with that absolute core of the fan base, the people who buy the tickets, the fire for seeing some change here. Even if people on Twitter, or you and I, or people who go to 2 or 3 games a year are fired up about it, it seems to me like the Pirates are responding to the people who buy the most tickets and the season ticket holders who do not seem that upset to me.
Well, I would say the one thing is I think that group is shrinking, Adam. Slowly but surely, that group seems to be shrinking. There are a number of people that have been over the course of time, and again, this is anecdotally just, from what I see on social media and whatnot, there have been a number of people over the course of time who, have been steadfast in their defense of the Pirates, who I have seen started to change their tune a little bit and finally get to a point where they are sort of in a place where it's, hey, what are we really doing here? You know what I'm saying? Like, what are we really doing here? And I think one of the things that happened this year, very simple. You added Paul Skeens. You added Jared Jones. You essentially added O'Neal Cruz. I would even say you added Nick Gonzalez because he's better than whatever they had at second base last year. And you still have the same number of wins. And not just that, you had a stretch in August and early September where you were awful at the worst time of year. To me, I think there were a number of people, and I know the group that you're talking about, that are finally to the point where they feel like, this is not going to ever get better. And so I think that maybe, you have to bottom out a little bit. I think what bothers me more is that obviously, I mean, based on what we've seen, obviously Bob Nutting really believes that group is big enough that he can just basically get away with doing what they're doing, which is, hey, let's bring the whole band back and, bring back Shelton, bring back Jerrington. We'll do it for another year. I think that is one of those it is a little bit of arrogance on Bob Nutting's part, in my mind. Well, there is that group that's out there that will basically do and say whatever they want to do and say.
Do you think that it's true then, Paul, that who does Bob Nutting think is a fan? Because I would argue, I think it's really only season ticket holders, and whether you've got a 20-game plan or an 80-game plan, whatever, you've invested significantly in the team. I really feel like he thinks those are the only people that count as Pirates fans, and everyone else is a baseball consumer who's going to show up 2 or 3 times a year, buy $30 worth of beer, buy some dinner, and they're going to do that just because they want to get a couple of nights out in the summer and sit in the ballpark, and that he doesn't have to please those people or the people who watch the team religiously but don't pay to come to the ballpark for whatever reason. Some of them are, a lot of these guys I see on Twitter who are the most passionate about the Pirates. I think some of those guys on the North Shore 9 crew, they don't live in Pittsburgh, so they're not coming to home games. Does Bob Nutting not consider those guys fans because they're not paying customers every night? Because that's how it feels to me. He's not responding to the people who, for whatever reason, are very interested in the team but are not spending a ton of money on it. He's only interested in what he can win over with the people who are paying to be in that ballpark every night.
Well, and you know what? I think what's even worse, I'll tell you what's even worse, Adam, is I don't even think that he cares. I think he cashes his check, it clears every month, and he's happy. And I think that, he's gonna make money whether those people, show up or don't. He's going to make money. The season ticket holders, like you said, they're going to buy tickets. If, they happen to have a good month and they're winning and, a bunch of people want to buy single game tickets, great. If they don't, great, that's great too. So I'm just telling you, it's one of those situations where I just don't think he really cares that much when it comes right down to it. If you really want to get my full opinion about it, he knows he's going to be cashing checks. And again, nobody has ever been able to quantify exactly how much he makes, right? Forbes magazine has tried, they've tried, but the consensus is that he makes somewhere in the north of $50 million a year. And I said this on my Q&A or mailbag or whatever we call it, the other day. If I told you you have a business, so I tell you that, okay, you have $2 billion in the bank, and you have a business that you can put minimal effort into, and you're going to make 50 million plus every single year. Why would you ever think about selling? And why would you ever think about, well, you know what, I'm going to dump another $30 million into the payroll because that's $20 million that I don't have or that's $30 million I don't have in my pocket. But I mean, if you can get away with it, it's good work if you can get away with it.
But why? But when you're at the point that he's at, where if he sells the team, he's probably a $2 billionaire. Can't you just put that money in the system at 5% and accomplish the same thing?
Yes, absolutely.
Without making everyone hate you and having all the that's the part I don't understand about the concept that he would never sell the team. But why is he? Why at this point? Maybe if you made this argument in 2010 or whatever, before they had jumped up so much in value, okay, different conversation. Now they'd probably be worth $2 billion on the open market, and right. You don't have to do another thing and pull $50 million out a year.
Well, I mean, I think that's the biggest thing, though. If you look at it, Adam, that's the biggest thing. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. So what did they spend? $80 million this year, right?
Yeah.
And they got 5 games from being 500, right? So in his mind, well, we didn't have Paul Skeens for the whole year. Jared Jones was out for a period. We had a little thing where we went through a hitting slump there. Those things, they'll take care of themselves next year. We can accomplish the same thing. Plus, we'll probably win 7 or 8 more games, which puts us in the playoff discussion without spending a penny more. And in fact, if you think about it, Well, they're going to save some money because they got at least $10.5 million from Aroldis Chapman and $3.5 million from Rowdy. That's $14 million that they're not going to have to spend next year. So my thing is, if you can do that, do it. That's not how I would do it, but I'm just saying that his thing is, and clearly it does not feel like he cares even a little bit what people say about him or think about him.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Paul, is the worst thing that can happen now that they've made this decision that they reach, I tweeted this last night, that they reach this season's expectations next season. And let's say they win 82, 83, 84. And then they're going to declare victory, and they're going to give those guys contracts. And they're at least, I don't know whether they'll be employed in 2030, but they're going to be getting darn near paid almost either close to 2030 or through 2030 without having accomplished practically anything. I mean, I think that's the scenario that I feared. There's another one I fear too, Paul, of if things go poorly, if things repeat and you end up south of 500 again next season, and then you say, all right, now we're going to fire Ben Cherington. Now we're going to fire Derek Shelton. Now we're going to start over. Then you're probably only 2 years away from when you would probably be considering trading Paul Skeens, because you're not going to be able to sign him to a free agent contract. You're not going to be able to keep him here. You're losing a year of control because of the Super 2 stuff they did. You're losing a year of control because of the Rookie of the Year voting. So a new general manager is coming in here having to trade Paul Skeens in 2 years anyway, and that's the only real chip you will probably have to make things better. I think you could make an argument that if they don't win this season, the clock is ticking on when they're going to trade Paul Skeens.
Well, here's the thing I would ask you. If they start next season with Derek Shelton and Ben Cherington, is there anything that could happen that they would move on during the season? My answer is probably not. And if they do, then they've got a big problem. See, to me, I could have made this case. You fire Ben Cherington and let the new general manager decide if he's going to go a little bit further with Derek Shelton. But you've pointed this out, and I've seen this a number of other places. Ben Cherington has now presided over a team that has finished fourth or fifth. What is it, 7 years in a row now, going back to his Boston time? At some point, don't you have to say, okay, he's not the guy to get it done? I mean, at some point you have to look back and say that World Series or whatever is so far in the rearview mirror based on his body of work. But Bob Nutting has clearly made it his decision that, hey, this is his guy and he's going to give him an opportunity to try and get it right. Well, if that's the case, then we're stuck with this group all of next year, no matter what happens. And, God forbid if something happens next year where Paul Skeens gets hurt, say Skeens gets hurt and O'Neal Cruz has another major injury that keeps him out 40 or 60 games. That could be enough of a justification that, hey, you know what, they really didn't have a chance this year, so let's give them another year. So to your point, the worst part of them coming back is the potential that they might be here for a longer time than you really think.
Yeah, or the consequences of waiting a year. I mean, you're right. I think you're trapped in, unless you win 90 games next year and get into the playoffs. You're in a situation where either you're going to extend people for almost making their tenures here almost a decade. You're going to extend them for very limited success, or you're going to have kicked the can down the road, possibly to the detriment of being able to do anything with the best player you may have ever had a chance to draft, in most of our lifetimes.
Right. I think that if it were me or you, Adam, we would have a different concept, which would be we have Paul Skeens for a 3 or maybe 4 year window tops. So let's try and make sure that we can go sort of, I don't want to say all in because I hate that, but let's make sure that we can put together the best teams we can. And I just don't know that Ben Cherington is the guy to do that. I just feel like, to me, I look at what he's done, his body of work. I look at, the trades that he's made, the waiver moves that he's made. And, I give him lots of credit for Paul Skeens, although that seems like it was a bit of a no-brainer. I give him credit for Jared Jones in some ways. I give him credit for Joey Bart. But then beyond that, I think that there's a whole lot of really bad decisions. And, I'll give him a C for Aroldis Chapman. Chapman was fine, but I felt like they could have spent that money elsewhere, because I think that a closer for a team that's still trying to find itself is a luxury item. And in this case, it wasn't even a closer. It was a setup guy until the closer, went south.
Yeah. Yeah. Paul, there was also another good point that Jason Mackey made that I wanted to kind of pull out a little bit more. He said, Ben Cherington said that there was evidence of progress. And then Jason asked this morning on his video, compared to what? And he looked, more at the Cherington's tenure and compared the success they had this year to the first 3 years and said, what is the baseline here? I'm going to ask his question in a different way. Is this franchise really any better off than it was at the end of the Neil Huntington era? Because people talk about the end of the Neil Huntington era like it was like the dumbest thing that ever happened in baseball history, and that Neil Huntington was so obviously an idiot that there's nothing Ben Cherington could do to be on that level. I don't look at this organization and see anything different than I did at the end of 2019.
Right.
It's not like that 2019 team had no useful players on it.
Well,
there were useful players here and guys that were decent, and they decided to fire sale them rather than just try to make things a little bit better with that core.
I think a big part of, the problem that you have here is that 3 of the 4 best players, and we've talked about this how many times, 3 of the 4 best players on this team were guys they inherited: Reynolds, O'Neal Cruz, Keller. I mean, at the end of the day, those are 3 or 4 best players. 5 years down the road, you added one no-brainer first-round pick that is, it broke into that group. But you're right. There's a lot of guys that are on this team that aren't that much different than the guys that were on the team 4, 5, 6 years ago. I do think Nick Gonzalez and Joey Bart maybe are 2 guys that give you a little bit of hope for, next year and beyond. But maybe Andy Rodriguez, although, again, I don't know what he's going to look like because he's been hurt all year, But I think that it's almost a pipe dream to really, really sit here and say to yourself, they're going to definitively be better next year, because I just don't know that they will.
Well, and what's worth pointing out too, Paul, is it's not like these guys that they got rid of because they were afraid of paying for them are out there like just earning enormous sums that the Pirates can't afford. Starling Marte is on a 4-year, $78 million deal with the Mets. Josh Bell is on a 2-year, $33 million contract with Arizona now after he got traded. I don't believe Jamison Tyon's contract is that big of a deal. They could have kept those guys, Paul. And I'm not saying that I know that things would have gone the way people wanted and that there would have been playoff berths and anything like that. But it's not as if they couldn't have done things with those guys and reasonably afforded them while bringing some of these younger prospects along. Right.
I mean, I think that's the other thing, is that you talk about, they fire saled some of these guys. What did they really get for them? That's that's the larger question. It's one thing to fire sale guys. It's another thing to fire sale guys and get something for them. To me, it was clear. Look, it was clear when Ben Cherington arrived, and he refused to use the word rebuild and kept saying, well, I mean, rebuild would suggest that there was something there in the past, so you knew what was coming. The problem is it shouldn't take this long to get back to 81 or 82 wins. It just shouldn't.
Yeah, I agree. Paul, let's quickly get to some college football here before we wrap up the show. I think the first question I have for you is, what questions does Pitt have to answer for you to believe in them as a legit contender in the ACC? We saw Miami stumble a little bit. They ultimately win on that controversial call at the end, but they did not look like they can't be beaten by anyone in that conference against Virginia Tech last week. What does Pitt have to show you to say, yeah, they can be a contender in this conference where no one really looks particularly dominant this season?
I mean, obviously the easy answer is beat Clemson in a few weeks or whenever they play Clemson. But listen, it goes deeper than that for me. Okay. I don't want to hear about their record at North Carolina and how it's a bad matchup and how they always struggle with North Carolina. And North Carolina's had a good record and they've had their number. I'm going to be really gentle here when I say this. North Carolina stinks. Okay? They stink. They're terrible. They are a bad, bad football team. I don't want to hear about them slopping around and losing a garbage game in North Carolina and, whatever the reason. In fact, I'm not saying that they, obviously North Carolina's got scholarship guys and all those stupid cliches. So, it doesn't have to be they score 70 points against them like James Madison did. But go win this game and go win it pretty handily. I was trying to pull up while we were talking. I was trying to pull up the rest of their schedule. SMU, okay? I think SMU they're okay. They killed Florida State, which I don't know what that means because everybody kills Florida State. But SMU is another game. Okay, they're reasonably good, and they've got some good players, and they've had some, decent outings and whatnot. Go beat SMU. Cal, they play Cal. Cal lost to Florida State. You get Cal here. There's no reason why you shouldn't be able to go win that game. Syracuse, I know that, they're better and all that other stuff. I mean, last week we saw Syracuse and Syracuse. It looks to me like they're going to be a 7-win team type thing. I just look at the rest of the schedule and say, they play Clemson, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks from now. They should be 9-0 going into that Clemson game. If they're not, it's a problem. I mean, I'm just going to put it out there to you. You want to tell me, I'm sorry, 10-0 or 9-0. North Carolina stinks. They better beat Cal here. They better beat Syracuse here. SMU is, reasonably good. It's down there. You want to tell me they lose a tough game down there? I might live with that. But then you got to beat Virginia here. So at the very worst, you better be 8-1 going into the Clemson game. Otherwise, I'm not sure where you're at. I think the ACC stinks right now. I don't even know who's good in the ACC. I think Miami is okay. I don't know how good they are. You know what I'm saying? I think Louisville is okay. I don't know how good they are. I think Clemson is actually pretty good. I know they got smoked by Georgia or Alabama, whoever it was the first week of the season. I'd be willing to bet that Clemson is going to be the team that gets to the playoff from the ACC. And depending on the matchup, they will probably win a game or two.
Paul, I also wanted to ask about Penn State. They're moving the ball, but they're not finishing drives. They've obviously got a kicker situation with Sandra Sahadak missing 3. But they also went for a 4th down against Illinois that they didn't get because of the kicker situation. They've had a couple of solid drives end, with interceptions. Are you concerned about Penn State at all? Because I know there's a lot of people in the fan base that are. I've made the argument, as I did on our Penn State show with Joel Haas, that the more important thing to me is that they are moving the ball, and I think that finishing drives and getting more points is going to come. But I know you were very bullish on Penn State, early in the season. I was curious if the way these first 4 weeks have gone has shaken your faith at all.
No, it hasn't. I'll tell you why. This is sort of James Franklin, isn't it? I mean, they tend to play sometimes these inconsistent, irrational kind of games against teams they're supposed to beat, and they end up winning them all. I mean, whatever you want to say at the end of the day, there's no style point. They win them all. I would say this week against UCLA, it's one more chance to sort of get some things tightened up and tuned up and, try and figure some things out. And then after that, I guess we'll really get a chance to see, because then they play USC and I think they play at Wisconsin. I don't know how good at Wisconsin is, but I'm assuming up there it's a tougher game than it would be at Penn State. And then they play Ohio State. And those are the 3 games right there in a row where if they don't play well, they could lose. So to me, I don't worry about them because I've said this many times and it angers Pitt fans. But I always say this, and I mean this. The difference between James Franklin and Pat Narduzzi is Pat Narduzzi every so often might win a huge game, but he's going to lose at least 2 or 3 that he's not supposed to lose. James Franklin recently doesn't seem to win many big games, but he never, ever, 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 ever loses to a team he's not supposed to lose to. And so, and even though some of those games are ugly, I mean, what was it? It wasn't Kent. It was the other MAC team they played earlier where it was ugly. Yeah, it was ugly for a while, but you knew they were going to find a way to win. I expect them to beat up UCLA pretty good this weekend, get some things straightened out, and then I think they go to USC, and we'll have a much, much better idea of what we're looking at when they go there and play against USC on the road. Because if they don't have their offense together, I mean, I think their defense is pretty good. At times it's been really good, at times not so good. I think fundamentally it'll be a good defense by the end of the year. But if you don't score, I mean, USC, they've got a pretty good offense. You could find yourself down, 14, 17 points, and you might not be able to come back. So this week, I just want to – what I would like to see from them, a really good performance against UCLA. Because I think UCLA is bad. They're up at Penn State. Go beat them up a little bit, and then get yourself together and see where you're at.
Get you out of here on this, Paul. I'm curious to get your opinion. A lot of people saying the Georgia-Alabama game didn't matter at all because they're both going to be in the playoff. And I think a lot of people are just looking at the 12-team playoff as if you get in, then that's all that really matters. Where, I look at Georgia's situation. I think things got a lot harder for Georgia losing to Alabama. It's going to be harder to get to the conference championship game. They have a difficult schedule. And then, even if you don't win the conference championship, then you got to play an extra game against somebody. And if you're Georgia, you might have to go on the road. Are people going to learn over these next 8 weeks, Paul, that yes, Alabama and Georgia might play again, and that this game may not end up being the biggest game they play against each other all season. But these regular season games still matter, and there are still tiers within this college football playoff of if you win your conference, you're going to be at a massive advantage. And if you get a home game in that first round, you're going to be at a massive advantage. I don't think teams 10, 11, 12, Paul, are going to be winning a whole lot of college football playoff games and a whole lot of college football playoff national championships.
Whenever I hear that argument, Adam, you know what I always say? How relevant was the Texas-Alabama game last year?
Yeah, true.
14 playoff. They played. The loser was still in the playoff. So what are we talking about? In Georgia's case, it makes it a little bit more difficult for them because they probably have less margin for error to still get to the SEC title game. But there's a very good chance these teams will play again. And so, I just think that when you look at it that way, I think every regular season game is going to really matter. And you know what? I agree with you. It's a big difference being in the top four than it is being in the top. Being in the top four is a big, big difference than being 5 through 12. And the other part of it is if you are in the top two, you have home games, which I think is really, really important. 2 home games, right, leading up to the final, I think, right? So
if you're in the top 4, you don't get a home game. You go straight to the bowl sites. It's right. The 5 through 12, or the 5, right. 6, 7, 8. They
That's
get the
right. Yeah. Game. So either way, my point is, I think you get, there's some advantages. The other part of it is you play an extra game. I don't care what anybody says. Most teams at that time of year would really welcome the rest. And so, a week off, get their guys healthy, get their guys, you know what I mean? I think that to me is important. So you got to let the season play out. There's going to be a lot of twists and turns, and, there'll be the thing where week 10 looks like this is going to happen. Then all of a sudden week 11, a couple of upsets happen, and look, you just grind through the season. I think every game matters, Adam. I've never bought the argument that it cheapens the regular season at all.
Yeah, and I made this point to Joel Haas on the Penn State show. I said, if Georgia gets blown out in that game, Penn State's probably ranked ahead of them and kind of in the pole position for hosting a home playoff game. But then you look at the projections this week when Georgia comes back and stays pretty high in the rankings. Penn State's still kind of on the outside looking in at hosting a bowl game as the current math goes. And obviously there's a ton of time left. Plenty will change. I think I'm just using it as an example of, that game had a big impact on Penn State this week and their hypothetical outlook. And I think there's going to be a lot of that where, okay, do Georgia and Alabama playing matter a ton to each other? Who knows? But I think that game matters in the context of what everyone else getting in and competing for those spots. And I think that's what makes this format a little bit more exciting because there's a lot more games that matter to a lot more teams. No,
absolutely. And it keeps a lot more teams interested. If you're a team like, Clemson's a bad example because they're probably going to, win the ACC. And at 12-1, even under the last format, 12-1 champions of the ACC, loss being to Georgia, they probably would have made it anyway. But, a team like Louisville, losing to Notre Dame, if they win all the rest of their games, they're still alive. I think that's important.
Yeah, so it'll be fun to watch that continue to play out. Paul, thank you for joining me this week. We're going to mess with this live format a little bit in the coming weeks, maybe go a little bit longer than we have on Thursdays traditionally. So if you enjoyed what you watched today, sign up, subscribe to the channel, like the video if you enjoyed it, help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We're going to have a lot more coming at you this week. Christopher Carter on the North Shore Drive. We'll be back on Friday. Paul and I will be back after Steelers-Cowboys on Sunday night. It'll be late, but stay up with us. Excited to react to that game. And then, of course, we'll be back next Thursday. So thanks for your time, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.